Have you ever sat in the deafening silence that followed his sudden distance, wondering what happened, where it went wrong, and why he couldn't just say goodbye? Silence isn't absence. It's communication. And sometimes, it's the final message. When a man goes silent, he's not just pulling away. He's telling you everything he either doesn't have the courage, the clarity, or the compassion to say out loud. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that silence, you know, it's louder than words could ever be. This isn't just about relationships ending. It's about reclaiming your power in the aftermath. Today, we're going to dive deep into why silence is a man's loudest goodbye, and how you can transform that silence into strength, clarity, and a new chapter of your life. Let's begin. When he goes silent, the first instinct is often to assume something's wrong, that he's overwhelmed, confused, or going through something he just doesn't know how to talk about. You convince yourself that maybe if you just give it time, he'll come around. He'll explain. He'll apologize. But the truth is, silence isn't confusion, it's a decision. A man who's confused usually still talks. Maybe clumsily, maybe not perfectly, but he stays present because he still cares about the connection. But silence is intentional. It's a way to remove himself from responsibility. It's easier to slowly fade out, to dodge hard conversations, to not be the bad guy in the story, because saying nothing often feels safer than saying the truth. And yet, ironically, that silence is the truth. His absence is the answer. The slow replies, the emotional detachment, the way you suddenly feel like you're walking alone even though he's technically still around. That's not confusion. It's someone trying to exit quietly. And the hardest part? You feel the shift before it ever fully happens. Your intuition whispers it. He's pulling back. But you wait, and in waiting, you hope. You start overcompensating, giving more, asking less, tiptoeing around the growing space between you. And still nothing. Silence continues. That's the decision right there. You're fighting to stay in something someone else is already leaving. Not in words, but in actions, in silence, in avoidance. And that silence is not passive. It's a loud declaration of exactly where you stand in his life. The more you chase him for answers, the more he drifts, until you realize you were never in confusion. You were in denial. His silence was never a mystery. It was the clearest message of all. And then there's the cruel contrast between what you gave and what he's giving now. You showed up. You made the effort. You reached out when things got tough. But his effort fades, and in its place, nothing. No check-ins. No warmth. No, how are you really doing? Just cold space. Empty. Effortless. And at some point, you realize the lack of effort is the presence of truth. It tells you everything you need to know, not about your worth, but about his capacity. Because people don't suddenly become incapable of showing up. They just stop wanting to. That's the sting. It's not that he couldn't. It's that he chose not to. He chose silence. Chose to be absent. Chose to leave without the courtesy of clarity. And yet you're still there, holding the weight of a relationship that you didn't let fall. You wonder if you should have done more, said less, played it differently. But the moment you start rewriting your history to excuse his silence, you erase your own truth. The truth is you were there. You tried. And someone who values love doesn't go silent when things get hard. They lean in. Silence doesn't mean he's overwhelmed. It means he's done, and he's hoping you'll be the one to make the goodbye easier, by giving up for him. It's easy to think that when someone walks away silently, it's because they didn't want to hurt you. That somehow this quiet exit was meant to protect you. But let's be honest, when someone chooses silence instead of honesty, it's not kindness. It's self-preservation. It's the easiest way out. It's choosing their comfort over your clarity. Because truth takes courage. Telling someone you no longer see a future, that your feelings have changed, that you're stepping away. Those things take guts. But silence, that's the quiet weapon of avoidance. And while it might be easier for him, it's so much harder for you. Because instead of pain that has a name, you get 100 little open-ended questions with no answers. You replay every word, every message, every look, searching for clues like a detective trying to solve a case that was never meant to be closed by you. Your mind becomes a battlefield. Was it something you said? Something you didn't do? Did you expect too much? Were you too much? You start making up stories in your head because the silence has left a void, and human beings hate voids. We fill them with anxiety, with self-doubt, with fantasy. And what makes it worse is that everyone around you says, just move on. But how do you move on when you were never given a proper ending? How do you heal a wound that doesn't even have a scar to trace back to? That's what silence steals from you, closure. Not just about the relationship, but about your sense of self. It leaves you suspended between chapters, unsure if you're supposed to turn the page or go back and rewrite the last sentence. And that's the real damage. Because the silence doesn't just hurt, it lingers. It lingers in your self-esteem. It lingers in your next relationship. It makes you doubt the voice inside you that once felt so confident, so sure. But here's the shift. You don't need his words to close the door. You can end this story yourself. You can stop waiting for the final paragraph he never had the courage to write. Because sometimes the real power is in choosing to give yourself the goodbye he couldn't give you. It's a strange thing when you start realizing that maybe you were meant to outgrow the ones who couldn't speak love out loud. The ones who liked the idea of connection, but not the reality of vulnerability. The ones who enjoyed being loved, but didn't know how to hold it. You wanted presence, honesty, growth. He gave you mystery, distance, and eventually, emptiness. And that can mess with your head, especially when the good moments were so good. Because then you wonder, was it real? Did he ever actually feel what I felt? Or was I just filling in the blanks with what I wanted it to be? The truth is, someone who walks away without a word was never equipped to stand beside you in the first place. Love is not just shared through affection and chemistry. It's spoken through consistency, emotional safety, and showing up even when things get uncomfortable. And if he couldn't say the hard things, if he couldn't speak love with action and presence, then what you were holding on to was probably more about potential than partnership. You saw what it could be. You loved who he was capable of being. But a relationship based on potential is a relationship that constantly asks you to wait and tolerate. And maybe this silence, this ending, was never meant to break you, but to finally free you. Because now you get to stop settling for silence and start demanding the kind of love that's not afraid to be spoken out loud. There's something incredibly disorienting about realizing that someone who stood beside you never actually walked with you. It's subtle at first. You share your thoughts, your feelings, your hopes, and he listens, nods, maybe even mirrors some of it back. But then comes the distance. Not in miles, but in effort, in energy, in emotional investment. Suddenly, you're doing the heavy lifting. You're planning the conversations, asking the questions, trying to keep things alive. And still, he grows quieter, more distracted, less present. You keep thinking maybe he's just going through something, maybe he just needs space, maybe he'll snap back into the version of him you first fell for. But what if that version never actually existed in the way you hoped? What if he was never truly walking beside you, but just appearing to? Some people don't commit to the journey. They just walk parallel to it, dipping in and out when it suits them. And the painful truth is, when someone can walk away quietly, when they can vanish without explanation or accountability, it's because they were never really holding hands with you to begin with. They were holding on to the benefits of your love, not the responsibility of it. They enjoyed what you brought to the table, but never intended to stay for the whole meal. And I know that's brutal, because you believed in it. You poured your time, your heart, your patience into something you thought had depth. But if someone can disappear like it all meant nothing, you have to ask yourself, were you ever truly on the same page, or were you reading the story while he skimmed the cover? And here's where your power lies. You don't need him to admit it. You don't need a final word, or an apology, or a neat little bow on the ending. You just need to trust what you already felt all along, that something was missing, that you were giving more than you were getting, that the silence wasn't sudden. It was the final chapter of a connection that never had the legs to go the distance. What happens next is even more dangerous. He goes quiet, And in the vacuum of that silence, your own voice turns against you. You start asking, was I too much? Did I expect too much? Maybe I'm the reason he pulled away. This is the trap. When someone you loved goes silent, your brain rushes to fill in the blanks. And because you're emotionally invested, you fill them with self-blame. It's a survival instinct. We want a reason, and when we don't get one, we make ourselves the reason. But his silence is not your mirror. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his emotional maturity, his communication skills, his willingness to be present. If he couldn't face the discomfort of honesty, that's not your failure. That's his. But if you're not careful, you start absorbing his silence as truth. You start believing that maybe you are too needy, too emotional, too difficult to love. And this is where you need to pause and reclaim your voice. Because silence isn't just about what he didn't say. It's about what you now tell yourself every day. And you have the power to change that script. You can decide that just because he left without words doesn't mean you have to fill the space with shame. It means you get to fill it with truth. And that truth starts with one simple, powerful belief. You are not too much. You were just too real for someone who wasn't ready. There comes a moment, after the silence, after the confusion, after the back and forth in your head, when it finally hits you. This wasn't just him ghosting you. It wasn't just bad timing. It was a wake-up call. Because sometimes it takes someone walking away in the most painful, passive, dismissive way to make you realize what you've been tolerating. You think you're strong because you're holding on. Because you're patient. Because you believe in giving people grace. But grace without boundaries becomes self-neglect. And that silence, that moment when he chose to vanish rather than speak, that is the moment you finally see the truth. You've been showing up in places where you weren't truly seen. You've been giving loyalty to someone who didn't even have the decency to give you closure. And it hurts, God, it hurts, but pain is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the clarity you've been avoiding. The silence, in all its coldness, strips away the fantasy. It rips off the illusion and shows you exactly who someone is when things get uncomfortable. You begged for honesty. You begged for communication. You hoped love would be enough. But he chose distance. Not because you weren't worthy, but because that's all he was capable of. And what's wild is that deep down you knew it. You felt it long before the silence became loud. But we hold on to potential. We hold on to the version of them we created in our minds. The version that only ever existed when things were easy. The silence woke you up. It forced you to finally ask the question, why am I working so hard for someone who stopped showing up for me? And in asking that, you get your power back. You realize the goal is no longer to win them back. It's to win yourself back. To stop shrinking yourself for someone who couldn't even offer you the courtesy of a goodbye. That's the shift. That's where the healing begins. And it begins when you decide that you're no longer waiting for someone else to close the book for you. Because the truth is, you don't need his apology. You don't need his explanation. What you need is to say the words he never could. The ones that allow you to let go with dignity. To acknowledge the pain, yes, but also your effort, your heart, your growth. That matters. And while he may have left you in silence, you don't have to stay quiet about your healing. You can speak. You can cry. You can scream into your pillow or write letters you'll never send. Because healing isn't polite. It's messy, raw, and real. But the most powerful part? It's yours. You get to take back the narrative. You get to stop defining your worth by someone who didn't have the emotional tools to love you properly. And you start by saying to yourself, I was enough. I gave love. And now I let go. Because the words he never said will never carry more weight than the ones you finally speak to yourself. If this spoke to your heart, if it made you feel seen, understood, and just a little more whole, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who's still sitting in silence. And subscribe because we're not done healing, growing, and rising together. Speech balloon, drop your story in the comments. What silence did you finally stop waiting to hear from? And tell me, what topics do you want to hear next? Your voice matters here. Always has. Always will. You're not alone. You're not forgotten. And this isn't the end. It's your beginning. Yellow art.